Zach, the floor is yours.
My name's Zach. I work for Taylor & Townsend, and I'm going to talk about carbon management and sort of the opportunities and challenges of doing it, and sort of use some of the experience I've had with some infrastructure clients about to sort of evidence the challenges and opportunities around that. I started off as a civil engineer, got chartered, moved into project management, and now moved into sustainability consulting. Sort of got experience in sustainability due to the nature of civil engineering, and also by working in international development projects, which were trying to achieve the Millennium Development Goals, which have turned into the UN Sustainability Development Goals. So by contributing to circular economy research and with their relationship with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and working on decarbonisation technologies with the Environment Agency, and also now delivering carbon management in portfolios and programs, and also I'm part of the IC Decarbonisation Knowledge Network. And if any would like to reach out, there's my LinkedIn there, and we're good to connect with you. And I will probably most definitely like any of your hosts as well. Next slide, please. Can we go next slide? Oh, sorry, there it is. Yeah, one more slide. Yeah, that's one perfect. So, but just generally, Taylor & Townsend, you probably might have heard us already for Kate. We're probably more known for our project management and cost management capability. We do have a strong advisory capability as well. And we sort of apply our sustainability advisory of two areas, sort of more general sustainable solutions, and then also net zero programs. And we also work in numerous sectors, so housing, within the built environment, so housing, education, healthcare, but in areas in grey, the areas that I focus on, which are more energy, utilities, defence and transport, and what we would class infrastructure and capabilities. Next slide, please. Yes, this is the point now where we'll talk about carbon management standards and sort of some of the best practices in the industry and what you have to do. As project managers, this is obviously very important for all of you because this is what you will be doing, and what doesn't get managed or measured doesn't get done. So when we talk about carbon management, specifically within the built environment, so that's buildings and infrastructure, there's sort of three strands or columns of information that we need to produce or standards which govern our work. So in terms of a corporate level, you have the greenhouse gas protocol, which is the world's most widely used greenhouse gas accounting standards, applies to companies, organizations, countries, and cities. The emissions from the greenhouse gas protocol are split over three areas: scope 1, 2, and 3. That's direct emissions, indirect emissions, and then other indirect emissions. So your direct emissions would be the gas you burn in your boiler to heat water. Your indirect emissions would be the gas that is burned to produce electricity that you use. Then other indirect emissions is sort of everything else. And the reason it's particularly important for the built environment is that capital goods come under scope 3. So that's your scope 3 capital emissions. So it's the emissions spent on the products and materials and the construction of those products and materials. And also as well, you have significant influence over the direct and indirect emissions of companies through your capital projects. The next strand is management standards. So this is the PAS 2080. So this is a carbon management in buildings and infrastructure. A new version is just released in 2023. And this is a free standard and publicly available. So you can download it for free from the BSI. PAS 2080 includes requirements for all value chain members to show leadership and establish effective governance mechanisms, reducing whole life carbon through a common management process. And this is probably what you guys, as project managers, as more and more companies and clients and projects adopt the PAS 2080 standard, that will be what you'll be interacting with most. It's this carbon management process, which is relevant to your project program. And then finally, there's the assessment standards. So key to any carbon management is the carbon assessment. And there's sort of a series of standards here which govern sort of the modules of that carbon assessment. And then there's also, which is BES EN 17472 and BES EN 15978. And there'll be equivalents of that for the European standards. I'm not too sure about internationally. I'm sure there's similar standards out there. And then there's BES EN 15804, which is the standard for environmental product declarations. This is when you are doing a construction project, you have things called EPDs, which will be the declaration of the products you're using. Generally, most assessments at the moment are done through calculating it from the raw materials up, understanding the emissions from the raw materials and adding on processes to that to get to a construction project. But as we move into the future, more and more companies and suppliers will provide environmental product declarations, which will give you the answer straight away without calculations. So for PAS 2080, this is a sort of a brief overview of it. And essentially it's a standard and it's all about trying to claim conformity to the PAS 2080. So it has specific clause requirements around decarbonisation principles, leadership, integrating carbon management into decision-making, whole life carbon assessment principles to support this decision-making, target setting and baselines, monitoring reporting, procurement, and continual improvement. And then it sets out those requirements, the different responsibilities across the value chain members. So there's different requirements, asset owners, managers, designers, constructors, product and material suppliers. And there's some overarching requirements for all value chain members. And this is probably, depending on where you are in the value chain, it's a really good document. It sort of accurately describes exactly what you've got to do. And you can understand how you're performing sort of the industry best practice and how that relates to your project and your existing management systems. Next slide, please. So the carbon management process is really split into three distinct stages. You have the setup for your projects and program. And this is about applying leadership, target setting and baselines. This is about setting up your project and program to achieve decarbonisation. You then have the management phase, which is carbon assessments, monitoring reporting, procurement, continual improvement, integrating carbon into decision-making. And that's done at every work stage. And that's what's in the orange box there. And then the outcomes you deliver is decarbonisation. And decarbonisation is the outcome you're delivering, but the decarbonisation principles and clauses within PAS 2080 probably govern setup management as well. So it can be is an overarching requirement across all the different distinct stages. And this, if you look at this as a project manager, this isn't too dissimilar to a project management plan, a project execution plan, whatever the preferred term is. And this is really describing some a generic management process with some real specific requirements around carbon. Next slide, please. So in the decarbonisation principles are sort of what governs everything around carbon management and decarbonisation in built environments. And you have a requirement to manage whole life carbon under your control and influence, align a net zero carbon transition at a system, network or national level. What that's describing is that your carbon emissions actually fits into a much wider context. So you'll have a corporate strategy, you will have a national strategy if it's out Paris climate change, and you will probably have also sort of regulatory requirements. It's making sure that your program, a project fits into that wider system and delivers a systematic net zero transition. You also then manage whole life emissions by applying the carbon reduction hierarchy. So in the second column, that's what you can see there, where it says avoid, switch, and improve. And basically, this is a very rough approach to decarbonisation principles and hierarchy. But if you think about it, the more carbon you avoid spending, the less carbon you will spend. So that's avoiding has the highest intervention in terms of reducing carbon on projects. And switching is the next has the next biggest effect. This is about switching out materials and switching out products for lower carbon options. And then when you get to the improve stage, and this is where you're improving materials, products, construction processes that you've already got in place and improving the emissions of them. And that has the least effect on the carbon emissions. And as you can see here, this puts a lot of emphasis on avoiding as being the most effective. And that makes sense, really. And you will probably reduce the most amount of emissions by reducing your scope. And that's sort of the easiest stuff to remove. And then when you get to the harder to abate stuff, we talk about construction plants, construction processes, we will look to improve those processes. They're very hard to abate. So it's about getting that low-hanging fruit dealt with as soon as possible within the program or project process, and then leaving the harder stuff. You can then even manage the harder to abate carbon emissions down the project process. One of the other key principles is that you've got to implement appropriate governance and make sure you align decisions with decarbonization principles. Carbon management should underpin all work, so carbon management should be central of all management processes. And you have to have a system-wide approach managing carbon to understand the risks and opportunities across the whole life. Because the decisions you make as a designer, as a project manager, as a client, as an asset owner, have greater impacts across a much wider range of the whole life of a project, of an asset. So you can be talking about 60 or sometimes up to 120 years of impact, which you have control and influence over. And then also, yes, the asset system and network impact need to be understood. So how your decisions impact that across the whole network and asset system needs to be understood and implemented. And just going back the left-hand side there, we're talking about control and influence. And this is basically highlighting how in the project or program boundary, it's key to understand what you have control over and what you have influence over. So specifically, you have influence over user emissions. You can't actually control that as the project or program. That is down to the asset owner to control that. But you can influence it. So understand that how you're going to proportion that control, how you're going to influence that positively is important for decarbonisation. Next slide, please. So one of the key parts of any setup, carbon management setup, any sort of decarbonisation, any net zero plan is leadership. It is a key enabler of carbon management. It gives momentum to decarbonisation decisions, allows the correct capabilities to exist across organisations, and allows supply chain to plan for and drive decarbonisation. So examples of this is by setting an organizational strategy for carbon management. And everyone should be adopting carbon management standards or plans or processes within their wider business as usual management processes. You should show leadership by putting money into upskilling and carbon literacy programs for your teams and the supply chain. And make sure you properly fund decarbonisation programs and low carbon projects. We all understand that it's going to be hard to achieve a net zero construction project, but if you don't start putting research and development money into that technology, into how that technology applies to your company or your program, then you'll never achieve it. So you got to start putting money in the correct places to create correct outcomes. And also you want to reward decarbonisation efforts, be that monetarily or just through reputationally. That's about creating a good culture of decarbonisation within your projects and programs. Next slide, please. And so a key also part of setting up a carbon management process is target setting and baselines. For targets, you have to adopt carbon reduction targets set by an asset owner manager. So if you are the asset owner or manager, you should be setting targets for your supply chains. And if you're in the supply chain, you should be adhering to that or understanding what that target is. And you got to make sure that it's shared across all of the value chain members and understand who across the whole value chain will be how they can influence control carbon emissions to achieve targets. So for baseline, we've got baseline of projects in order to make a target update. And you can collect and report carbon data when delivering projects. So to be very open and honest about the data you've got, and also understand its uncertainty and the inaccuracy of that data. And you can't, there's sort of quite an immature level of carbon data across the built environment. So there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and the only way you can manage that is by being open and honest about the data you use to create baseline targets and how that can be improved and maybe some of the shortcomings. So some good examples of this is that projects and programs should align their targets, the decarbonisation targets, to their decarbonisation plans. So a lot of corporate companies now will have established an SBTI, so Science-Based Target Initiative, which basically tells you how much carbon. Oh, sorry, we go back. Can we go back one slide? Jose? Okay. Well, yes, I said. So a lot of companies will have a decarbonisation target and a decarbonisation intensity you have to achieve every year in order to contribute to net zero standards. So make sure everything aligns to that. Also, you should also understand what is the industry best practice through your institutions or through the project management institution, ICE, all the different institutions around infrastructure and the built environments. You will find out best practices. At the moment, it seems to be 40% in capital carbon. So that 40% reduction should be a target of your project or program. And for the baselines, it's hard to have enough data as soon as possible throughout the early stages to try and use cost carbon intensities, and also should start analyzing historical projects and start understand to create carbon models in order for you to start doing more effective assessments of your projects. Next slide, please. So once you've done your setup of the carbon management processes, you have the management phase. So this is probably what you're all more familiar with as project managers. And this is about managing carbon at every work stage of a linear project. There's sort of 5 clauses here. There's integrating carbon into decision making. There's the assessment. There's whole life carbon assessment principles to support decision making. There's a monitoring reporting, procurement, continual improvement. And as I've mentioned, this is applied at every work stage. They should be a central part of any process. So the carbon assessment is really the heart of any carbon management. What doesn't get measured doesn't get done, the old adage. And when you do a carbon assessment, you have to use fine methodology for assessing emissions. And you have to make sure your study boundaries consider all emissions and is budgeted in the project or program. It's not fixing it just to your project or program. Because as mentioned before, you have controlling for a much larger range of emissions. And assess emissions and removals within your control inference. Choose appropriate methods and select appropriate level of accuracy and detail. And what this is showing here on the left is a nice whole life carbon assessment for buildings. And what you've got there is a series of modules. So you've got your product stage, construction process stage, use stage, and end of life stage. And then beyond that, you've got your benefits, loading, and benefits and load beyond the system boundary. And when you're doing a carbon assessment, your project or program may cover A1 to A5. So that would be the product stage, the construction process stage. As you can see, you've actually need to do an assessment of the impacts and benefits you have across use stage, end of life stage, and then the benefits and load beyond the system boundary. And it's really key and important that you do this and that you report this effectively to the clients so that they can understand it's so central to decision making on the project or program and on the impacts it have in the future. Next slide, please. So we've got, and then the next part of the carbon management process is monitoring, reporting, procurement, and improvement. For monitoring reporting, you can complete a RACI chart at each stage for monitoring and reporting, submit whole life assessments at each work stage or a significant change to the project. If there is a large change or compensation event comes in, you should understand the impacts of a compensation event in carbon as well as cost and time. You obviously need to report your progress against targets, report that on a frequent basis that the owner or the leadership team can start making impacts and can make decisions to get you back on targets, and keep records of good practice and low carbon options, because this is really useful and makes life easier going forwards on the project program. Procurement is really important because it accelerates carbon reductions, the value chain. It should be and probably what's quite key about procurement, which I think is a really good point in the PAS 20 standard, making sure carbon is part of a holistic sustainability approach. Carbon gets a lot of attention, but it is only one part of sustainability. So having that sort of total focus just on carbon, meaning you may miss opportunities and benefits you can bring for a holistic stance of sustainability. And also procurement is a really good opportunity to incentivize the correct behaviors. How are we going to get the correct skills in, and how we're going to get them delivering some excellent outcomes for the project program. So once you've gone through these processes, you have the continual improvement, and you want to make sure the continual improvement process reviews all of your carbon management processes and should be focusing on how we're developing low carbon solutions, which is what we want to achieve, the outcome we want to achieve. And we want to make sure that this learning is shared across the value chain and engagement is maintained across the value chain. And some of the best practices I've seen around this is that you should get the carbon measurement process should be established at the start of a project and program and should be integrated with the existing project and program processes. And some of the places I've seen it done best is where it's been done sort of at the target operating model stages and start building that into sort of critical success factors and stuff like that to make sure that you do deliver decarbonisation as well in your program. Yeah, so these are be set up. And also, one of the best practices is that this is quite a, let's say, inaccurate, but there is a lot of uncertainty and there is a lot of immature data. There's a lot of immaturity skills. So it's really important to be able to embrace change and make sure that you are capable of embracing change and that assessments may go up and down, targets may not be reached, but it's about trying to achieve them is what's important. So once you've set up some of that measurement process between gateways, the ultimate outcome is that you will be integrating carbon into the decision making. So this is all about, yet again, trying to understand carbon reduction under your control implements. So your racing matrix kin. You also got to make sure your interfaces are properly managed. If you have control over carbon, influence over carbon as well, you've got to understand who actually is that going to interface with. If I have influence, what will that impact? Is it asset operation and maintenance teams? Is it decommissioning teams? How will my decisions interface with other people in the value supply chain? And the key part of it is collaborating effectively with stakeholders across the value supply chain. So we've always got to establish and implement a carbon management process, prioritize requirements of management processes, identify carbon reduction opportunities, prioritize system-wide decarbonisation, collaborate with other stakeholders, value chain members, and include nature-based solutions and circular economy opportunities. So nature-based solutions are sort of the gold standard of decarbonisation. Number one, they have a very, very minimal impact on carbon emissions because they're nature-based and they can even have a positive impact on emissions in terms of carbon sequestration. So that's sort of like a good go-to starting point for any solutions you have for your built environment projects is by starting on nature-based solutions. And also as well, we want to include circular economy opportunities. And both of them are sort of can be presentations in themselves. There's loads of good information out there. But looking at the circular economy, and this is called the butterfly diagram from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and basically it's showing you how you can keep materials and products in use for as long as possible, reducing their emissions over the whole of their life cycle. And it's really important to do this specifically in the built environment where sort of most of our emissions come from products that we are installing. So it's really important to do that. Yeah. So that's an overview of the carbon measurement process. And I was going to go in a little bit about some of the benefits of the carbon measurement process, and specifically comes from my experience of working in the Environment Agency, which have an ambitious target of net zero by 2030. And so hence we're quite mature in the development of the measurement of the carbon measurement processes. So one of the key ones is improved business cases. In specifically UK for public projects, you have the green book, which is sort of a 5 case business model, and in the economic appraisal for the carbon benefits your project has. So this is the carbon saved from implementing your projects. So say electrification of a railway, for example, you can actually incentivize. You can actually value that carbon saved and use that in your economic appraisal to improve your business case. Carbon targets, there's a really good golden thread all the way out from project programs all the way through to the government in terms of net zero. It's a really good opportunity to align your project and programs to strategic plans from government policies and companies. There's added value from refiners scope other than cost and time reduction. So there's another pressure put on scope value value engineering or scope refinement with cost, time, and carbon. So there's a real focus on that now. And the carbon assessment at regular intervals gives more evidence to decisions. So the fact that there's carbon assessments done at the end of every gateway and every significant change event, continuously gives more and more data to make decisions from. And as mentioned, sort of previously, the um, refining scope, the best measure for carbon, for decarbonisation is avoiding spending the carbon. So when you start refining scope, this is sort of where you are avoiding elements of carbon emissions. And it lets the projects really focus down on what's the harder to abate parts of carbon. And we can put our time and effort and energy into those harder bits. Um, yeah, I think that having a carbon target baseline at the start of projects, the start of programs, really gives that focus to the business case and everyone else in terms of refining scopes before they submit them for major review. Next slide, please. So some of the other benefits are improved quality of projects. Assessment starts to gateway leads to better decision making. So as mentioned before, you've got more data for your decision making. Decarbonizing principles place an emphasis on quality rather than just speed of delivery. So it's not about churning things through a process and just delivering the outcome as quick as possible. It's about actually reviewing the outcome and making sure that what we're asked in the first place is correct. And engages supply chain in more quality measures as well, rather than cost. And this definitely is a very much of a motivating factor on projects and programs. If it's a low carbon or got some interest in decarbonisation technology, it really motivates the supply chain when they're involved in that. And it leads to more outcome focused projects rather than outputs. Asset owners are also pushing to more of a system wide thinking approach. As mentioned before, the study boundaries for assessments are just what's within your control. It's in what's in your influence. So you're having to make decisions on projects around their whole lifetime, which can be 60 or 120 years, however long it is. And so that really brings everyone together in a much more system way thinking, which is a really benefit which comes from this carbon monitoring. And also, you got the great leadership buy-in. As mentioned before, leadership is a key enabler of carbon management. Carbon focus has led to sort of a root and branches change across business as usual. And this sort of scale of change to try to make carbon to every decision-making process has led to sort of more streamlined and efficient business. Decarbonisation now is at the heart of national and area strategies. With leadership performance being measured against those strategies. So if a hub is not achieving their decarbonisation targets, sorry, Jose, can we go back? Thank you. If they're not achieving those targets, then they could get that pain in terms of performance reviews, in terms of pay, in terms of bonuses, that sort of stuff. So it's really important. And this gives lots of support to decarbonisation decisions and makes it a lot easier to implement, and before where it would have sort of been dismissed as a nice to have. This alignment of leadership to decarbonisation really gives momentum and some important decisions being made much easier. And as mentioned, supply chain is incentivized to create these outcomes now. So now money is going to the right places to achieve the right outcomes and achieve this improvement. Next slide, please. So this is sort of some actual case studies, and that's sort of more the anecdotal experience from implementing carbon management processes. And this is looking at the actual sort of evidence. So what you can see here in the green box is the continuous reducing carbon emissions between gateways of those different case studies. And this is showing that the carbon reduction is working, the carbon management process is working, because we are achieving that reduction of carbon between each gateway. And it's not just on the earlier parts of the project, it's also done in the build-up to FBC. What we've got in the blue box is the carbon emissions avoided. So this is what I mentioned before, was that if you have your the carbon benefits, so this is the carbon emissions avoided by implementing your project, you've got a huge amount, you've got quite a large sum which should be turned to a value in terms of appraisal. And this is quite important inside the environment agency for things like partnership funding calculators. This is about making their business case more and more attractive to finally get government approval or approval from reviewing bodies. In the brown box, you've got the evidence of the carbon reduction hierarchy. So they've avoided a blanket approach to erosion protection, and erosion protection source data from carbon figures. That's sort of like the carbon reduction hierarchy in action there. They've avoided the blanket approach, because maybe a blanket approach before would have been the fastest way to deliver a project. They've actually avoided that because it doesn't meet their carbon requirements. So they've tried to refine their project and improve their projects, so that they can reduce carbon. And then also they've understood that their road protection they are sourcing, and they get better what accurate carbon figures. So they are understanding the true impact of their products. And that's about being honest around the data certainty and then acting on it. In the yellow boxes, we've got this is sort of yellow boxes sort of showing how there's lots of exciting technology that comes off the back of decarbonisation, and the quality of products are improving significantly from a technical perspective. In these projects to sort of introduce decarbonisation, they're using prefabricated structures, they're introducing low carbon concrete, they're using recycled steel, and this sort of lean or more purposeful design not only has benefits in terms of carbon emissions, also will reduce the cost of the project. So now there's this extra pressure to try and improve the quality of project, the outcome projects, the outputs of projects, and some great benefits so far. Big team.